Greetings, happy warriors, and welcome to the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show, where I, your rabbi, reveal how the world really works. That's right. Thank you for being part of the show, and thanks for all you do to help spread the word of the show and gain us new listeners and new subscribers. I very much appreciate that. It makes it a lot of fun and adds greatly to the exhilaration in preparing the show. And we focus on this show on things that people really care about. And so although gardening is wonderful and growing things is beautiful and having a lovely garden and having flowers, it's all beautiful, but it's not essential to life. You can have a very good life even if you don't have a garden. Tennis, terrific game, good game to play, lovely game to watch. But if you don't have any tennis in your life is still just fine. Gardening and tennis are flavors. They're like adding some spice to a wonderful dish. It probably makes it a bit better, but it's not essential. You can still enjoy that wonderful dish by itself. But the wonderful dish itself always comprises the 5 fundamental on which we focus. And these are the 5 F's: family, finance, faith, fitness, and friendships. And, most importantly, our newest book is called The Holistic You, and it explains exactly how to integrate these 5 aspects of life. And you understand that family are all relationships that have to do with blood connections or sexual connections. You are connected to your cousins by virtue of the fact that grandpa and grandma created children. And you have cousins, all of that. Financial relationships, customers, clients, people you do business with, anybody connected with your financial welfare, and also relationships with your possessions and belongings, bank accounts as well as real estate or car, anything else you have that is an asset, all fall into the relationship of finance. And then friendships are all the relationships that are neither family or financial. If you're part of a political party, or if you're part of a civic organization like Rotary, or if you are part of a parent-teachers association, or whatever it is, anything that's not finance or family falls under social, or which is to say the F of friendships. Fitness is obviously your body, relationships with your own body. And faith is a relationship with the spiritual aspects of life. It included in that, of course, is relationships with the boss, but it doesn't necessarily have to end there or even start there, because we have relationships with intangible things like integrity and joy and love and happiness and loyalty and persistence and durability and willpower. All of these things are important parts of our lives, and they fall under the F of faith. So there they are, and those are the things that we focus on, obviously, because those are the things that really do matter in life. And I wanted to impart some ancient Jewish wisdom on the family side of it, and particularly on male-female relationships and its most imperative and fundamental instance, which is marriage. And I want to talk about 3 paradoxes, 3 things which you would have thought should be part of a marriage, but actually are not. The first one is tenure. Ordinarily, we know that when you have a job from which you can never be fired, your performance will never be quite up to the mark as it would be if you were in a job from which you could be fired. In other words, you know already, if you live in the United States, and this may be true elsewhere too, you know that going into a FedEx store is quite different from going into the United States Postal Service. You go into a post office, you get one level of service. Going to FedEx, you get a totally different level of service. Main difference, postal employees cannot be fired, even when committing the most egregious of offenses. There have been several instances recently of mail delivery people who have tossed the mail into a garbage or into a sewer and gone home. Just rather than actually do the rounds and deliver all the mail, they were actually photographed tossing the mail. And they had various disciplinary actions. They were suspended for a while with pay, but nobody was fired. You can't get fired from the post office. So who's going to insist on a top level of performance? FedEx, great job, work for FedEx, it's terrific. Screw up, you get fired. That's it. So let's say you're hiring somebody for your entrepreneurial startup. You find somebody you think will be good. You hope so. You hire them, and the first thing you say to them is, I want you to know you now have a job for life. No matter what happens, you are going to be okay. We're never going to fire you. We're going to help you. We're going to teach you. We're going to let you grow. We're going to let you expand and increase your skills and your experiences. But you can never be fired. That's how much we care about our employees. Well, it's a mistaken blessing, because the business isn't going to be around long enough to give that employee a very long job. That's right. It's contrary to all best practices in business. You don't set up a situation whereby you at the outset you say you can never be fired. Tenure for university professors. Many years ago, it made sense, because university professors were worried about academic freedom, and they can't teach, and they don't want to have to worry about upsetting an administrator who then fires them. So they came up with this idea of no firing. You know, you got a job for life if you get a tenured professorship. And obviously these are in high demand. It's a wonderful, wonderful life. Very little to do, very little in the way of responsibilities, and security. You can never be fired. Obviously, this has become a calamity. Anybody who's watched what has been happening on the American university campus knows full well already what an absolute disaster this has been, where professors now, for many years already, have been attacking the United States. They've been attacking the values of the parents whose children are at the university. They've been destroying the children's connection with their families, with their faith, and with their country. They've been undermining patriotism, and this is old, right? A long time that universities do not cooperate with various military programs to start introducing university students to the possibilities of military careers. And many universities haven't allowed these organizations onto campus, hostile to the country, to patriotism, very hostile to faith, and hostile even to the formation and establishment of the institution of family. So tenure has turned into an absolute disaster for America. Tenured university professors, even as I speak, the university at Columbia, New York, tried to bring police onto campus to control violent and disruptive behavior on the part of pro-Palestinian activists. And it was professors, tenured professors, who linked their arms and bravely and courageously blocked the police from coming onto campus. So here is a general rule. The person who pays is the boss. That's the general rule. If you accept money from somebody on a regular basis to do a job, then that person is your boss. And you can mutter as much as you like about independence and journalistic independence, but if you're a journalist and the editorial staff of the paper or the owner of the paper says, this is how I want you to cover the thing, the journalist says, well, I've got journalistic independence and integrity, I'll decide. Yeah, the owner of the newspaper doesn't always have the courage to do it, but should say, fine, then you have the choice of leaving and finding another employer whose views on content correspond with your own. But that doesn't work over here, so we accept your resignation. The person who pays is the boss. There is no way around this. And so this bizarre inversion by means of tenure, and in which university professors can act against the interests of the university that hires them and pays their salary, it's craziness. And craziness never works out well. You can get away with craziness for a little while, but it never works out well in the long term. The general rule is businesses work best when you bring somebody on board that they know very clearly what the key performance indicators are, and they know very, very clearly what the terms of the engagement are, and they know very clearly what the results are, where if you fail, what will happen and how. All of that. As employees, we all value and appreciate getting accurate information in advance of exactly what the deal is. And so, wouldn't you have thought that if a man proposes to a woman, and yes, the overwhelming majority of marriages happen when a man asks a woman to marry him, not when a woman asks a man to marry her. I've dealt with that in previous podcasts. But so let's say for a moment a man proposes marriage to a woman, and she says, I would love to. And he says, just to clarify, here are the key performance indicators. This is what I'm expecting from my wife. And if this is not going to work for you, or if it stops working for you, that's when we will end the marriage. Exactly as you would say to an employee, a new hire that you are bringing onto your company. So you say to your girlfriend or your fiance now, here's what's expected, and the marriage will end if this can't happen, if it can't work. But we don't do that. Somehow, forever is an important part of marriage. How does that work? Tenure. That's really what it is. You're offering tenure. And she might say to her fiancé, will you love me forever? Will you always love me? And he might say to her, I want you to be mine forever. These terms, especially at the start of marriages, terms like forever or for the rest of our lives, or even in marriage ceremonies, very often still and used to say, we'll be together till death us do part, in good times, in bad times, it doesn't matter. Gosh, there is no more certain definition of tenure than that. You don't get fired from this arrangement. You're married. And yet that works. Isn't that interesting? It actually works. The second paradox of marriage, and before I tell you the second paradox of marriage, let me ask you to subscribe to the show if you haven't done that already. You can deal with that quickly and easily, and that would be great. I'd love you to do that. And secondly, I also want to mention that one of the 5 F's, of course, is finances. And there are a number of very important strategies and tips and tools for increasing your earning. Not talking about investments, not talking about eliminating debt, talking about making sure that the next 12 months produce for you significantly more income than the last 12 months did. And, how much more? Double, 3 times as much, not 50 times more. When you know how to do something, you can get better in increments. If I hired a dance teacher, because I so admire people who can dance elegantly and move their bodies so expressively. And so I hire a dance teacher. There is no chance whatsoever that after a year of dance lessons that the Boston Ballet is going to come knocking at my door to see if I'd like a job. No way, not going to happen. I will be a little bit better than I am. A little bit better. And if I do it for a year after that, then I'll probably get a little bit better. And eventually I will run up against what is probably my natural limit. But I can certainly improve. And it's like that with making money as well. One of the troubles is that we all get locked in to a mental cage, as it were. There was once when I was a boy, my father used to often take me to the zoo in Johannesburg. It was a good zoo, and it was a wonderful outing, and I loved going with my father. And because we went so often, we actually saw a few things happen. One thing we saw was they had it was a pioneering zoo in terms of having relatively few cages. Mostly it had outdoor spaces with moats and anyways, the goat area was on a hill overlooking the lion's enclosure. And honest to goodness, one day we watched a mountain goat lose its footing and come tumbling down the slope, landing right in the lion's cage. And we held our breath. I was sure we were going to watch a kill. And the lion lay there looking at the goat. The goat was paralyzed with terror, and it stood there trembling and looking at the lion, and neither of them moved. And it must have taken at least 2 or 3 minutes before a keeper came along, went into the cage, and grabbed the goat and carried it out. And that was it. Why didn't the lion go for the goat? And another thing we saw happening, this was in a leopard's cage. Now, this leopard was in a cage. It was a couple of leopards, actually, and a fairly large cage, but a cage nonetheless. And we watched the keeper go in to take in new food and straw, bedding or whatever they have for the leopard. So the keeper opened the door of the cage, walked in, and kicked it with his foot to make it slam shut. But it didn't slam shut. It didn't quite lock. It sort of bounced against the stop and then swung back open. And the keeper had gone further into the cage. Between the keeper and the door was one of the leopards. And we thought we were going to watch that leopard make a bolt for freedom. And it didn't. It lay there. And it must have been a good few minutes before the keeper finished his tasks, came back, and we could see, we couldn't hear, but we could see that he was pretty shocked that he'd left it open, and he stood there for a couple of seconds just gazing at this swinging cage door wide open, and he'd even looked around to make sure the number of leopards was right, and then he walked out and made sure to close the door behind him. In both these cases, the lion and the goat and the leopard with the open cage door, none of them moved. Why? Because they were accustomed to life as it was. Ordinarily, a lion would love a tasty goat meal. Ordinarily, in the wild, if a lion was hungry and he managed to snag a goat, he'd enjoy it very much indeed. And this one probably would also have enjoyed it, but it didn't occur to him because the keeper fed him every morning and every evening, and he knew that his food came on this regular schedule. It didn't occur to him that he should do anything about it. He was okay with life as it was. And the leopard, again, it's okay. Is it fun living in a cage? No. Do you want to live in a cage? Absolutely not. But it's okay. The leopard's used to it. Pick himself up and walk through an open door. Like, for what? Go touring? Now, we are like that with money as well, where we get used to living on what we kind of are okay making. And the fact is that there's a lovely fat mountain goat just waiting there, and our inclination is to ignore it. There's a wide open door with a world of opportunity beyond it to increase our earnings, and we're kind of okay. And we start adopting the spiritual schematic of shortage rather than abundance. We start thinking in terms of, I've got to cut back my expenses to fit my income, rather than thinking, I've got to change my income. There's been inflation, probably 20% over the last 3 years. I've got to increase my earnings by 20% so as that I haven't taken a hit from inflation. And that is the right way to think. But the trouble is that we get accustomed to live how we're living. And it takes effort to face the unknown and to run out of that open door into that whole world of opportunity. It's not easy. It doesn't come naturally. And so one of the things that I teach in the Financial Prosperity Collection, and this is an audio-visual program. It's 10 hours long, and 10 lessons, about 10 hours. And you watch it at your own time with a friend, with a spouse, with a partner. You can go back and review it. You can stop and start it, and it's yours. You can listen to it as many times as you like. You can watch it, and we go through the basic principles that have enabled the people of Israel to do disproportionately well with money, in good times and in bad, and in hospitable regimes, hospitable societies, as well as in tyrannical regimes. And so all of this is the Financial Prosperity Collection. And because it is right now the festival of Passover that I'm talking to you, that is available on a very special discounted price. So go to the website at rabbidaniellapin.com, and there you will find the Financial Prosperity Collection, and you will see that you can get it at a very, very good discount price. And the goal, as I say, is to substantially adjust your ability, your spiritual schematic, your mindset, as well as to provide you with the very specific tools and tips and techniques in order to make a dramatic change. Whether you are an employee or whether you're an entrepreneur, it makes absolutely no difference. You should be expanding your earning capacity. So it's called the Financial Prosperity Collection, and I recommend that you go for it right there at rabbidaniellapin.com. Okay, so we spoke about tenure as being something you do not want to do ordinarily when you partner with somebody. And the next thing we're going to talk about is partnership agreements. I had a young friend. We're less friendly today because of what happened. He came to tell me that he is leaving his job and he is joining with a more senior rabbi whom I knew, and the two of them were going to start an organization together. And I said, congratulations, it sounds wonderful. Would you like me to run my eye over the partnership agreement? And he said, oh, we don't need one. We are very good friends and we just totally trust one another. And I said to him, I need to know whether you are asking me or you are telling me. If you are asking me, then I respond with some advice. If you are telling me, my advice would be unsolicited and therefore unwelcome, and I will keep quiet. And he said, okay, so let's say I'm asking you. I said, if you're asking me, I will tell you, please make a partnership agreement. It should be a substantial and real partnership agreement. What's expected of each of you? What happens if one of you doesn't perform? How does the partnership terminate? What happens if one partner wants to terminate the arrangement before the other? All kinds of details. All of that will make for a healthy, happy, and productive, hopefully, partnership. And he said, you know what, I'm going to change to telling you. I would never dream of telling him we should have a partnership agreement, and he wouldn't either. It would be an insult to our friendship. They did start the institution, and it looked quite promising. Within a year and a half, it all blew up, and they were no longer friends, they were no longer partners, and there was no institution. And sadly, I think my relationship with him suffered as well, because I think he felt a silent "I told you so," which I never would have said, obviously, but I understand that he felt that I was probably saying to myself, I told him, but I wasn't feeling that way. I was feeling sad about it. Agreements are always good when you have a partnership. So may I ask you, think about some of the people you know, couples in lovely, wonderful marriages for 30 years, 40 years, 25 years. How many of them have written partnership agreements? I would guess few to none. And yet, somehow, it works. So why is it that I would never recommend that anybody forms a partnership with anybody else without a partnership agreement, without an understanding, a memorandum, something that lays out on paper that they both agree to, they both sign, and it makes for so much of a better relationship. Surely you should do the same thing for marriage as well, right? And yet, it appears not. How does that work? That's another paradox. And then finally, the third paradox. The third paradox is that think about the pilot that is in the left-hand seat. He's the captain of the aircraft that's taking you on your next business flight. And how many planes do you think he has flown? How many types of aircraft do you think he's flown? Well, he probably started off his training on a two-seater Cessna, and then he might have gone to a larger single engine, and then he might have gone to several varieties of twin engine, and then he might have gone to a turbine airplane, and then after that he might have gone to a small executive jet. And by the time he is captain of he has his commercial license and he's captain of the airliner you're traveling on, he's probably become proficient in flying between 10 and 20 different types of aircraft. So, wouldn't you think that when your son is about to get engaged, you'd say to him, listen, this is the first girl you've dated. What you should do is have a relationship with between 10 or 20 other girls, and that way you will become experienced, you'll become knowledgeable, you'll get to know yourself, you'll get to know what you're looking for, and that way when you finally make a decision to get married, well, that'll be, see, nobody goes from no airplane to a twin-engined ocean crossing jet airliner carrying 200 people. No. It's a long step, so surely you should do the same thing. Or you tell your daughter, listen, this is the first guy you've got serious about. Do you really want to get married now? Shouldn't you really have a lot of different relationships with a lot of different men? And that way, when you do get married, you'll be experienced and knowledgeable. You'll be able to make a wise choice. What do you think? Isn't that something that you should say and do? And yet, intuitively, you know that I'm talking nonsense. And if you don't, there is enough literature on the subject. There is enough data and enough studies on the subject to establish beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's something everybody knows. The more intimate partners that each of the couple had before marriage, the less likely is the marriage to be long-lasting and happy. It's as simple as that. The happiest and most successful marriages are when each, the man and the woman, are one another's first partner ever. That's how it works. And this is tough information because in 2024, there's a lot of people who bought into the idea of the airline pilot. A lot of people bought into this idea. that marriage is what you do at the end of an exciting period of experimentation and getting to know lots of different people, and it doesn't work too well. It, first of all, makes it harder to get married in the first place. For women with a lengthy record of, shall we say, competence in a number of different types of aircraft, it actually makes it much harder for them to get married. They are less marriageable. And remember, I told you the majority of marriages happen because the man proposes to the woman. Well, most men are uneasy about proposing to women who have flown 10 or 20 different aircraft, if you get my drift. And so you would have thought, and yet it doesn't work. This also is a stunning paradox, and really, really surprising. Because when you think about it, particularly in this day and age, where you do not have to worry about pregnancy and you don't have to worry about disease, there are all kinds of steps you can take. And so what's wrong with a lot of experimentation? Surely it's good. I mean, what field can you think of where practice with a lot of varied circumstances isn't an advantage? Marriage is the exception. Isn't that strange? And so we want to try and understand that. But before we want to understand that, we've got to try and get clear on one or two important principles having to do with male-female relationships that'll help us put all of this into perspective. Let us clarify that marriage is unique and different from other male-female relationships, even other male-female family relationships. Think of the three types of male-female family relationships: father-daughter, mother-son, brother-sister. Now, in each of those three, proximity is not necessary. It might be nice, but it's not necessary. If my sister lives on another continent, we're still brother and sister. If my daughter lives in another city, we're still father and daughter. If my mother and I live in different places, different countries, as we did for a number of years, no difference. We're still mother and son. But how about if you meet a married couple and they say, I live in Hong Kong and she lives in London. Really? That's not a marriage. Yes, we meet in Paris once a month for a week. No. It might work for a while, and perhaps there's a plan and arrangement for a limited period of time, and it could conceivably work. But if this is the model of the marriage, forget about it. It's not long for this world. Because as I covered, some of you, I hope you remember a podcast I did in December 2023, a few months back. It was the second last podcast of the year of 2023, and it was about how marriage is about sharing a bank account and a bed. In other words, it was a show that focused specifically on the interplay between sex and money. Now, since sharing a bed is an integral part of a marriage relationship, obviously proximity is necessary, right? It stands to reason. Also, there's another way in which things are different in the case of marriage. The physical intimacy aspect. Here's what's so complex about it. And you know that any competent marriage counselor will tell you that if a couple comes along and they've got difficulties and they're having a rough time, and they really want to start putting it together, one of the early questions the marriage counselor is going to ask is, look, I'm not prying and I'm not trying to invade your privacy, but we do have to explore this. I need to know, how are things physically between you? Got to know that before we move on. And it's an important question. When you think about it, it's actually quite extraordinary, because in order for the physical relationship to be outstanding and for it to serve as a cement in the marriage, a joyful source of pleasure and delight in one another, the two have to collaborate. The man and woman have to collaborate. Neither can do it on their own. And what's more, each one must be devoted to the idea of bringing happiness to the other. And so a great deal of cooperation is needed for this aspect of marriage to work well. And yet the problem is that the man and the woman have totally different understandings of physical intimacy. What do I mean? Well, there are many aspects of the differences in how men and women relate to it. But let's just take it at its most basic elemental level. Thought experiment. You ready? Simple, straightforward thought experiment. A nice looking guy goes with a clipboard and he goes onto the streets, and during the course of a day in this thought experiment, he stops 100 women and he says to each one of them, would you like to come back to my house with me and spend the night making love? Our thought experiment it's a thought experiment because we don't need to carry it out, because you know what the answer is. You know. Now, statistically, one never likes saying 100%. Out of 100 women, 100 of them are going to walk away, say no, slap his face, and ignore him. But maybe, how should we say, 98 out of 100? Now let's reverse the experiment. A woman, nice-looking woman, stops 100 men on the street. And let's stipulate that none of them are virtuous married men. And she says exactly the same thing to each man. Would you like to come home with me, spend the night making love with me? And out of 100 men, she asks, well, I don't want to say 100 will say, yeah, take me. But let's say 98. And that way we sound plausible. But you know the answer. It's obvious. It's a thought experiment. We know the answer. That's one of the big differences. But why should it be that way? Again, as I said, today we live in a time where pregnancy doesn't have to be an issue, and health matters do not have to be concerns. And so why would 98 out of 100 women turn down our man doing this experiment? Why? Why should they turn it down? What's the harm? And the answer is, it's different for women than for men. For women, a prerequisite is something of a relationship, something. And when, as has been happening often on university campuses for many years already, where women have been conditioned by evil, lying professors to think that men and women are identical, and that what women should do is start approaching physical intimacy just like men, and they then do engage with a man on a physical basis without the prerequisite of any kind of emotional or spiritual relationship, they hate themselves afterwards. And they want to pretend they didn't do it. And one of the ways of doing that is saying they were raped. It wasn't consensual. Yeah, when you got drunk with a guy and agreed to go back to his dorm, yeah, We understand that you feel lousy. We really get it. And we understand that that afterwards you'd much rather believe, and I'm sure you do believe it. You desperately want to believe you didn't do what you just did. You were forced. Somebody took advantage of you, because it's contrary to the nature of women. Right? Obviously, there's an exception here and there, but it's contrary to the nature of women. Now, for men, there is no prerequisite, very few, and most men, as I say, other than virtuous and married men, but most men presented with that invitation will say, yeah, great, let's go, absolutely. What about an emotional relationship? What about a spiritual connection? No, don't worry about it. Very little in the way of prerequisites on the part of men in that situation. It's a very, very difficult. So given these massive differences between how men and women approach physical intimacy, how does it work? And an additional problem to that, tacked onto it just to make it even worse, is how do you avoid the familiar becoming tedious? How do you retain the euphoria of the initial honeymoon period? After all, 2 or 3 years of living together, a certain tedium of familiarity sets in. How do you avoid that? You have to be able to avoid it. It's a death knell for a relationship, but how do you avoid it? And how do you deal with the fact that to a man, the commitment isn't initially an important part? And so he's got to deal with this. And she, at the very least, is dealing with, and I'm putting it this way deliberately and cautiously, she has to deal with being invaded. And yes, it has its benefits, but at the same time, this is a very, very strange thing when you think about it. No wonder it's at the core of vast bodies of literature in many different languages. Will he, won't he, will she, won't she, what's going to happen, how will the relationship change after they do. Just think of the fiction you've read, and how often do you read a book where the mystery and magic and marvel and strangeness of the physical relationship isn't an integral part of the story? And so we're expecting a man and a woman with totally different ideas of physical intimacy to get together, and we say, you're married, congratulations, enjoy the rest of your lives. And the two of them are now expected to be able to function satisfactorily on a physical level. It's remarkable. It's amazing that it works at all, right? Well, let's ask ourselves yet another question, and that is physical intimacy good or bad from a moral perspective? And there are religions that view it as questionable. There are religions that view it as a sad necessity. In ancient Jewish wisdom, sex is holy. But like anything holy, it is powerful. Holy things are powerful. And powerful things can be very powerfully good and very powerfully bad. Anything that is powerful can go both ways. Atomic power can free humanity from drudgery without playing around with silly giant windmills or acres and acres of photocells. Nuclear power, atomic power, can free us from drudgery. But if you speak to folks who were in Hiroshima or Nagasaki in August 1945, you also know the downside of nuclear power. And so anything powerful can go both ways. Sex, when it serves as a source of ecstasy and bonding in a marriage, how wonderful it is. Amazing. When it is allowed to run like a nuclear reactor out of control, and the reaction can be a sustained out of control reaction, it can destroy a society, destroy lives, families, people, and also an entire society. And so we understand the enigma. The moral enigma has had theologians for centuries asking, it has to be holy, right? Because it's the source of life. That's how God designed new life to come into the world, new human beings. But on the other hand, how can something that brings such sensual pleasure be holy? And what I want to emphasize today is that, yes, when used correctly, it is holy and important and wonderful. No source for embarrassment or shame or anything at all. One of the reasons why the absence of clothing is actually a moral requirement in ancient Jewish wisdom. Because, right, it's so holy. Why should there be any shame? Why should there be any awkwardness or embarrassment? And so when a young couple learns these approaches early on, before their wedding, as you can imagine, it gives them a very different kind of head start, particularly since neither one has been with anybody else ever in their lives before. It's a wonderful way to start a marriage. I admit it's not widely practiced. It's not a lot of people. It's not that common. People have been corrupted for the last 60 years. It's since 1962. Some of you will know why I picked that date. And so how do we make all of this work? How do we do it? Well, some of you are enthusiastic about the Bible. Some of you have a relationship with God and with His Word, but many of you do not, and that's fine as well. It should not matter to you where the information comes from that I share with you. Because I never ever say to you, hey, you should know that I'm telling you the truth because it's from the Bible. I never say that. Because it's not how I want you to think, whoever you are. I want you to listen to this material. I want you to wrap yourself around it, make room for it in your soul, and now subject it to empirical testing in your real life circumstances. And then, eventually, I'm hoping, and I think I'm confident, that you will say, wow, yes, this turns out to explain things I never understood before. As I watch life and I get to see how people yes, it was right, it's true. That's the kind of approach I like. And so on that basis, it makes absolutely no difference where it comes from, right? And you can, those of you who do not have a relationship with God and with His Word, just ignore the information when I tell you where I know it from, where in ancient Jewish wisdom I've experienced it. All you need to know are the results and the data that comes out of this, okay? That's all you have to worry about. And so what are we going to look at? Well, before I actually look at the thing specifically, I want to tell you about the most mistranslated word in the Hebrew scripture. The Hebrew word is tamei. If I had to transliterate it into English, I'd say T-A-M-E-I, tamei, T-A-M-E-I. But in Hebrew, it's spelt with 3 Hebrew letters. And how is it translated? Well, it's translated often as impure and often as unclean. And without a doubt, Those are the two absolutely worst translations imaginable. It's not correct, not even remotely correct, but you see, there are many ideas that do not translate cross-culturally. If the Inuit languages, I understand, have many words for snow, which makes sense because living in that environment, even subtle nuances in snow variation are important. To me, there's snow. That's all there is to it. To a skier, an avid skier might have 2 or 3 words for snow, but you can't translate those languages. So if I were to imagine an Inuit igloo building manual, in Inuit languages, it says something quite different, but if it was translated into English, it would say, first of all, in order to build your igloo, you need to find snow. Do not be tempted to use snow, snow, or snow. However, in extreme circumstances, if the weather is cold enough, you could use snow. You see, the words aren't there in English to provide the nuances. Translating from German into English doesn't work very well. Translating from Russian into English doesn't work very well. And indeed, students of Russian literature very often learn Russian to be able to read them in the original. Makes a big difference. And so there are concepts in ancient Jewish wisdom that do not exist, for words for which do not exist in English. And one of them is the idea of death, the idea of the extent to which we can all be unhealthily impacted by a subconscious awareness of death. A great deal of mental disorder, anxiety, depression, a lot of that comes because of people having no ability to deal with the reality of death. When you think about it, it is absolutely one of the most challenging, if not the most challenging aspect of life. How on earth are you supposed to function, realizing every single day that there's no point in anything? Why worry about anything? Because the end of the road is death, and it's inevitable. Why do anything? Or alternatively, you might say, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. You may as well fulfill every conceivable sensual pleasure to the point of internal destruction. But why not? How do you live a normal life with the reality of death? This is a hugely important aspect of proper living. And if I had to put my finger on the top 5 explanations for Jewish success and the longevity of Hebrew culture, this would be in the top 5, if not the top 3. The technologies for dealing with death, because it's hugely problematic. It's totally understandable that people can go nuts, that just this constant subconscious awareness of death can grind away at you. It's terrible. But there are ways of dealing with it. Unfortunately, they do not exist in English culture or Western culture. And so please be aware then that the translation of impure or unclean, which you will find often in the 5 books of Moses, never ever means impure or unclean. It means suffused psychologically by an overwhelming and subconscious awareness of death. I don't know another way to express it. There isn't one word for it. It's when your soul and your spiritual being, call it your emotions, call it your psychology, gets suffused by an overwhelming but subconscious awareness of death. So you don't necessarily put your finger on it, but it's working its toxic effect on you all the time, unless you have a way of dealing with it. What is the way of dealing with it? Well, one aspect, there's several things, and I'm not going to do them all today, but one of the ways of dealing with it is to make sure that we overcome the effect, partially by keeping it separate from us and partially by curing it. So in other words, flowing water is always a cure. Natural water, the ocean, a lake, these are always a cure. And this is one of the reasons that so many people find spiritual solace, either at the coast, at the beach, by a lake, by a waterfall, by a river. Have you ever thought about, like, why is that? Many, many, many more people find solace and comfort and a yearning and a joy being near running water in a way that they don't necessarily, in a desert. And again, I know the desert landscape has its own appeal. That's quite different. But being around water, it's a different thing. And so, for instance, when we are at a cemetery for a funeral, when we leave, we make water run over our hands. Now, why it's the hands and not the whole body under those circumstances, I can explain and perhaps will at another time. But let's suffice it to say for the moment that fingers are very powerful. Hands are very powerful. When you think about it, you can run a pneumatic hammer, or you can hold an eggshell. You can perform, if you're a watchmaker, you can fix a watch manipulating tiny, tiny components. And a day later, you might be using a sledgehammer. A hand is amazing. Hands let us write, they let us create, they let us build. Hands are very powerful. But in the same way, as I said before, anything that is very powerful in one direction upwards can also be very powerful downwards. It so happens that this deathly quality tends to congregate, tends to mostly be on the fingers of the hands. That's where it's found. And so by pouring running water over our hands as an act of will, not just holding them under the faucet, because now it's not an act of will. It's your local Department of Water utility that's supplying the water. But if you fill a container and then pour it from the container over your hands, then that is our routine for leaving a cemetery. Because we've got to leave. You can't be at a cemetery without being additionally suffused with this overlay of a subconscious and overwhelming awareness of death. So that's one example of how we deal with it. Another example is we make sure we keep those worlds separate from each other. And how do we do that? We avoid trying to have seances. We do not talk to the dead. We don't try and we just don't do that. We keep a separation between life and death. Really, really an important thing. And now let us look at reproductive systems of men and women. Something very interesting going on here. With men, the emission of semen evokes no sense of diminishing possibilities. Men seemingly create an almost inexhaustible supply of seed. Incredibly wasteful. It's a strange design, and you need some spiritual awareness if you are curious as to why the good Lord designed men in that particular way. But with women, it's different. Once a month, a woman who is not pregnant, a woman's seed departs her body along with the various support structure, the nutrients and whatever else is needed in the uterus to make it possible for that egg, if fertilized, to begin to grow into a baby. And so that is evicted from the body on a monthly basis. And when it is, it naturally makes any sensitive woman a little sad. Why? Well, obviously, because unlike a man who produces limitless supplies of seed, a woman is born with a fixed supply. I don't know what the number typically is, but whatever it is, it's a certain number of eggs. And producing life is joyful. Many, many women love being pregnant. Women love babies. Some men do eventually also. But it's an additional spiritual sensitivity that women have. And so any sensitive woman feels the loss of an egg to be a bit of a downer. You know why? Because it's a mini death. It's a potential for life. It was the potential for a real, live, bouncing baby, which is not going to be. It's now leaves her body and it's gone. And so naturally, it's a kind of a slightly sad thing. Any sensitive woman feels that. And the man, well, a man realizes that in keeping life and death apart, even in its most minuscule form, even the fact that when a woman sheds an egg and it goes, and along with it is the liquid and aspects of blood and so on, all of that was part of the potential for life. And so when that goes, that is a tiny little opposite of life. Life could have been, it's now not going to be, so it's a mini death. Now, what is the most life-affirming act in which a man can engage? What is it? No, it's not going boating. What is the most life-affirming act in which a man can engage? Physical intimacy with a woman, obviously. And it is incredibly life-affirming for women as well. Obviously for women. But for a man, it's incredibly rejuvenating. And so, since we understand that for mental health and for spiritual tranquility and for emotional equilibrium, you've got to keep life and death apart from each other. And so therefore, what wise, knowledgeable, biblically literate couples do is that for that week, they do not engage in the most life-affirming act possible. They don't. And so I want to just give you the biblical sources for those of you who'd be interested and you'd like to see it. So it appears 3 times, all 3 in the book of Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 15, verse 19. You ready? And when a woman has a discharge, her discharge being blood from her body, she shall remain in a state of menstrual separation for 7 days. And there should be no contact. If there is contact, it would be, and here's where this word impure shows up. It's not impure, it's tamei. It means that it is not possible for a woman to not feel, a sensitive woman, to not feel that little mini death. And that's tamei. And so guess what? At the end of that period, when this process is past, she then goes ahead and immerses herself in what later in Christianity, for instance, became known as a baptism. But what it really is, it's something called a mikveh. It's a gathering of water, and its purpose is to get rid of the overwhelming subconscious awareness of death. Water always does that. And so, again, in Leviticus chapter 18, verse 19, do not come close to a woman during her menstrual period of tamei, although one of the English translations I was looking at says unclean. Not unclean, not impure. It's a subconscious spiritual awareness of death. Leviticus chapter 20, verse 18, again exactly the same thing, a strong prohibition of having physical relationships between a husband and a wife while she is in that period of menstrual discharge. Of course, nowadays, to be woke, you shouldn't say woman, you should say menstruating human being. But I'm not going into that area. You know, I resist it and resent it, and I stick with men and with women. So this is a very interesting thing. The interesting thing is that, yes, we actually observe this. Many people do. Large numbers. And virtually every community where there are Jews, every community has a special mikveh, a special bath. It's too complex and expensive for every home to have one, but they have one. Very often it's at the synagogue, it might be next door to the synagogue, and it's a pool of water which is an artificial lake. It's an artificial ocean. It is actually a very, very carefully engineered amount of water that technically, mathematically, if you like, resembles a river or a lake or an ocean. And a woman goes ahead once this process is complete and immerses herself, and then she joins her husband again. Well, remember I told you that one of the biggest problems in the area of marital intimacy is how do you avoid familiarity producing a tediousness, producing a lack of excitement? How on earth do you keep alive the specialness of the honeymoon? Well, I'm sure you all understand that it's not just in the area of male-female relationships, but people have strong relationships with their first times of anything. There's an entire special section in the Torah dealing with first fruits. Every year when a farmer's first produce, there's something very special about that. Even, if you are a gardener and you plant a tomato plant, the very first time it produces tomatoes, it's exciting, it's wonderful. Me, myself, I remember like yesterday, the very first time I flew an airplane solo by myself. I remember as if it was yesterday. We had done a few practice circuits. I landed the plane. The instructor was sitting in the right seat. He said, pull off onto the taxiway and bring the airplane to a stop. I stopped the airplane. He said, don't turn off. He opened the door and reached out, climbed out of the plane, stood outside the plane, and just before he slammed the door, he said, you're on your own, go for it, do touch and go, and then come back, I'll be waiting for you here. And he slammed the door. And off I went. Nobody else in the airplane. I'd done 14, 15 hours of instruction, which is, some people manage it in 10. And there I was. And I remember so clearly taking off, and I remember turning, and I remember turning onto base leg. And I looked out of my left window and I could see the airfield. I said, somewhere down there is Tom, my instructor. He's standing there. I can't see him, but I know he's there. And I'm here by myself. And then I turned on to final and lined everything up, touched down as smooth as could be, and taxied over to where I'd left him, pulled it up to a stop, and he got in again. He said, congratulations, you've done your solo. Never forgotten it. And so, yes, our firsts of everything are very, very special. And if there be some way to recreate the first time you were with your wife on a regular basis, wouldn't that be something? And this is the solution. This is the explanation. It's exactly right. Because after a husband and wife have been apart from one another, and it's a forced being apart, biblically required, the tension rises to the point where every month you actually have the most amazing date night, because it is literally your wedding night all over again. That's exactly what it feels like, because of this forced separation. But there's something very important. It's not just a forced separation to torment you. No, it's a forced separation. Remember I said there's a different way. Men relate very comfortably to the idea of physical intimacy. Women need there to be a spiritual relationship as well. And a spiritual relationship is brought about through talking. That's how connection is built through speech. Now, there's a wonderful book in the Bible called Song of Songs, which is an extremely erotic book about the courting of a man and a woman and their connection and finally the consummation of their relationship. It's extraordinary, and its purpose is to convey a sense of the power and the yearning of the ultimate relationship between human beings and God. But leaving that aside for the moment, there is a phrase that appears 4 times in the book of Song of Songs. It shows up 3 times in chapter 4 and 1 time in chapter 5. You know what the phrase is? My sister, my bride. What's that talking about? My sister, my bride? And it's teaching us something hugely important. And that is that from the man's point of view, if a man has no education and training and understanding, to him, the overwhelming majority of the marriage relationship is physical connection. That's it. To the woman, if she hasn't had an understanding of what the relationship's all about, to her it's largely an emotional connection. And so if I have a relationship with my sister, it's an emotional relationship. We talk. We have similar interests, we care about our family, we care about one another, we share a common history, and so there's a lot that bonds us, but it's a totally spiritual bond. There's nothing physical about it. But with my lover, it's a physical relationship. But what King Solomon is telling us by using this phrase 4 times in the Song of Songs, my sister, my bride, it tells us that for a really successful, durable, fulfilling, happy marriage, both those aspects of the relationship have to be present. You've got to have a brother-sister relationship and a groom-bride relationship. In other words, a physical, passion-filled, intimate relationship, and also a spiritual one of communication and emotional connection. And that's what that period of separation is for. Because, happy warriors, you know this as well as I do, that a man grows up innately believing that there is no pain, no hurt, no sadness that cannot be cured by going to bed with your lover. It solves everything. And in an uneducated way, since we are relatively clueless to begin with, and going into a marriage clueless is a really, really bad plan. But we are clueless in the sense that we guys assume that for women it's exactly the same. And so our solution when she's unhappy or sad or feeling melancholy is to sweep her off to bed. That should solve everything. It does for me. Right? But that's not how the world really works. This is a time where, maybe a hug or a arm around the shoulder in a totally non-erotic way. Yeah, maybe, but essentially it's an emotional connection. It's an understanding. It's a listening. It's a talking. That's what's needed. And so you got to build the sister and the bride. But as long as the power and passion of a physical, intimate relationship is there, it's impossible to achieve the subtle, soft connection of the spiritual and emotional. And so every month we have a period of time where we push aside, we do not have the passionate, powerful, physical connection, and that leaves an opportunity every month for the spiritual and emotional to blossom. Strengthens the relationship incredibly. And so you can imagine when the period of time elapses and the couple can once again get together every month, that's a date night for the stars. It's a date night you can't forget, because it's like a first time all over again. So, dear happy warriors, that is, I think, as much as I was planning on sharing with you. It's even a little more than I was planning on sharing with you. But that is exactly how to banish the tedium of familiarity, and that is how you maintain the original euphoria for one another. That's part of the secret of a durable, fulfilling, and happy marriage. Oddly enough, paradoxically, a separation. And so you remember we said that there are three paradoxes. The one was tenure would appear to be a bad idea for a marriage as it is in business. And the answer is that forever is a part of a marriage because exclusivity is a part of a marriage. And that is why that a man, even if he's just got married, there's a part of him, if you spoke to him, it would be awkward and uncomfortable, but he would acknowledge that he doesn't want to ever think of any other man ever touching his wife. Well, then by definition, that's forever. It has to be. That's a hugely important part. That's why we don't say tenure. No, the very fact that it is unconditional, we are together forever, that produces the emotional connection. That produces the sister of the my sister, my bride part that makes it possible for everything else to be rockets and searchlights and orchestras playing. That's all part of it. And so, yeah, you definitely want to get married with the absolute conviction that this is forever. And it changes everything. It makes it much. Why? Because my sister is my sister forever. There's nothing I can do to end that relationship. Look at your marriage as having that sister component. We're together. We may argue, we may fight, there may be difficult, whatever, it doesn't matter, we'll deal with it. We are together. And that is why the paradox of tenure is just a paradox. Secondly, you'll remember I said that the second thing was, how's about agreements? Why is it that we do not have page after page after page of marriage agreement with everything spelled out? And the answer is that, in a sense, we do. If we marry within a community, then there are expectations. And if we marry within a culture, there are expectations. This is how a husband is expected to behave. This is how a wife is expected to behave. And those expectations are there. It's an unwritten contract, but it is a contract nonetheless. And one of the ways we deal with this is by making sure that before we get married, we talk to our future spouse. And we don't just say, oh, we love each other. No, we actually go into discussions about how are we going to do with this, how are we going to do with that. Susan Lapin and I, one of the things we discussed was how we can resolve an argument. And we said, well, it would be great if we could both agree on somebody else. Because that way, when an argument crops up, as we know it will and has, it won't be one of us imposing their will on the other. It'll be an external third party to whom we both subscribe. And that enables us to get past the pain and tension of an argument in the quickest and easiest way to find our way back into one another's arms. And interestingly enough, to my astonishment, Susan said, why not your father? My father was a great rabbi. And I said, oh, yeah, I'll go for that. Little did I know that on the few occasions when we actually did have to turn to him to resolve an argument, he sided with her every single time, which I didn't expect, but he was right, and that's how things work. So, yeah, you are supposed to talk about things like children, education, and religion, and finances. All of these things should be discussed, absolutely. So you don't need a written contract because the marriage is forever. And then finally, the idea that the airplane pilot tries and develops competency in many, many different kinds of aircraft. So surely before committing to one another, no, it doesn't work that way. Again, exclusivity is part of the deal. And ideally, deep down, and today most men would never admit it, because it's a deeply buried secret feeling, which they know would be mocked and jeered at by woke society, and they believe it's wrong. They believe there's something primitive about them. Jealousy with respect to your woman, well, that's primitive. I'm beyond that. But it's not true. The fact is, deep down, most men would want to marry a woman who's never been with any other man. Never will and never has, ideally. And so, once again, the paradox is false. In the case of marriage, the more experimentation, the less durable the marriage, the less happy the marriage, the less fulfilling the marriage. And so there it is, my dear happy warriors. Whether you are married, there are many, many ways you can, even if it's late, you can still work on improving your marriage. If you're not yet married, you should know these things. If you know people who are not yet married but soon will be, well, you could do them a big favor by either sharing this information with them or by letting them listen to this particular show themselves, whatever it is. These are really important things to understand. Solomon wrote it down clearly: my sister, my bride. And I got to tell you that when I have explained this in person to couples, and I know the reaction already. The man's response is usually, "You got to be kidding, right? Really? You got to be kidding! I can't. How can I possibly? How long did you say?" And all I can tell the guy is, I can say to him, "Yeah, that's how it is. But I'm gonna share a surprise with you, and I'm gonna tell you that right now, your fiance, your beloved, your engaged, your future spouse, you know what she's thinking to herself? It's not that she doesn't like physical intimacy. It's not that she's not looking forward to lying in your arms. Of course she is. But she wants the sister part as well. And so while you're saying to yourself, no way, you know what she's saying to herself? Hey, that's kind of neat. That's kind of neat to have a certain period every month where we are going to relate emotionally, where bed isn't the instant solution for everything. We're going to talk. Fantastic. Yeah. My sister, my bride. Happy warriors, that takes us as far as we're going to go for today. And so I wish you a wonderful week, and I wish you growth in your friendships, your fitness, your finances, and your faith, and your family, your life of physical intimacy. Until next week, I'm Rabbi Daniel Lapin. God bless.